After the car accident, I was hit stupid. My archenemy David Turner took advantage of this to humiliate me, tricking me into sleeping with him. 3 years later, he grew tired of this game and left me to go abroad. Before he left, I asked him what our relationship was. He said, "We're friends, of course. You're stupid so you don't understand, but friends are supposed to sleep together." Later, when David returned to the country, I brought a male friend to meet him. "Is he your friend?" he asked. I nodded, yes. He sighed in relief. "Then why are you living together? Didn't you say friends are supposed to sleep together?" Now I sleep with him every day. Ding! This novel reminds you to click the subscribe button in the bottom right corner to read the complete novel. David Turner was coming back to the country. His assistant brought me to the airport to pick him up. We waited and waited, but he still didn't arrive. I lowered my head to look at my watch because Frank said he didn't want me to come back too late. I didn't want to make him angry. So I said, "I want to go home. I don't want to wait for him anymore." The assistant immediately became anxious, circling around me. "Mr. Turner should be here soon. Think about the gifts he's bringing you: a Barbie doll and a strawberry bear." These two toys struck a chord with me. I nodded in compromise. The next second, David Turner walked out of the airport. He was wearing a black shirt, the necklace around his neck swinging with his movements. He still had that unruly look about him. He walked a few steps to me and reached out to hug me. I stepped back, avoiding his embrace. David's face froze. "What's wrong? Are you still angry with me?" The anger David Turner was referring to was about the 6 months he left me. At that time, I was thinking about him day and night, but he never contacted me once. Even when I called him one time, he dismissed me with, "Stop bothering me." After that day, I never contacted him again. If it weren't for him saying he brought me gifts, I definitely wouldn't have come to pick him up. Come on, don't be angry. I brought you gifts. Consider it compensation for the 6 months I was away, okay? I nodded slightly, my gaze constantly drifting to the suitcase behind him. I just wanted the gifts. David took me in the car, driving all the way home. "I'm going to take a shower. You sit here quietly," David said as he was about to take off his clothes. In his black eyes, I saw the familiar intense desire. "Where are my gifts?" I said while looking down at my watch. It was already 9 o'clock at night. David was very dissatisfied with my distracted behavior. He frowned slightly. "Why do you keep looking at your watch? When are you going to give me my gifts?" "I need to go home." "Why go home? Haven't you missed me these 6 months?" I shook my head honestly. "No, so when are you going to give me my gifts?" David Turner was very unsatisfied with this answer. He sat across from me, crossing his legs, his tone displeased. "I didn't buy you any gifts. You can leave." I couldn't believe it. "You lied to me." The next second, my tears started rolling down. I was about to leave crying. But David called out to me again. "Cindy Brown, if you leave today, don't ever think about seeing me again." I turned back puzzled, then without hesitation, pushed open the door and left. I was driven home by the chauffeur. As soon as I reached the door, it opened from inside. "Frank." I sobbed as I threw myself into Frank's embrace. His warm chest gave me a sense of security. "What's wrong? Did he bully you? Why are you crying?" I looked up with tear-filled eyes. "He didn't bring me any gifts at all. He just tricked me into picking him up at the airport. He's so annoying." Frank patted my back, comforting me. There. Don't be sad. I'll buy you some tomorrow." "Okay." I got up from his embrace, suddenly smiling through my tears. "Didn't you want me to come back early? Did I come back early enough?" I was looking forward to Frank's praise. Cindy did great, coming back before 10. Frank smiled and stroked my black long hair. I like it when he touches my hair. Every morning, it's Frank who wakes me up. I like to sleep in, but he never allows it. He says it's bad for the stomach not to eat breakfast. Well, so every morning breakfast becomes him feeding me. I sit there with sleepy eyes as he feeds me porridge bit by bit. Frank, you're so good to me. I mumbled, about to kiss his cheek. But Frank was quicker, covering my lips. His eyes held a sadness I couldn't understand. I'll say it again, no matter how moved you are, you're not allowed to kiss strange men. Frank spoke seriously, which was rare. I tugged at my clothes corner, feeling wronged. But David said expressing gratitude means kissing. Frank let out a light sigh, cupping my face with both hands. Cindy, do you believe me or him? Of course, you. No matter what the reason, you're not allowed to kiss men anymore, whether strangers or familiar ones. Not even you? I looked straight into Frank's brown eyes, asking sincerely. Not even me. Okay. I compromised. But in my heart, I thought, since he won't let me kiss him when I'm awake, I can secretly kiss him when he's asleep. At noon, David called me, waking me up from my nap. Before I could speak, he said first, if you want a gift, come downstairs. I was slightly startled. I'm not coming down, you can't trick me again. Do you want it or not? If not, I'll give it to someone else. Yes, I want it. I got up, put on my clothes, and carefully looked outside. Sure enough, Frank wasn't in the living room. At this time, he's usually painting. I thought about it and decided not to disturb him. I can go out by myself. I walked downstairs and saw David Turner leaning against his car from afar. He waved at me as if calling a puppy. I jogged over and eagerly asked, "Where's my gift?" "Here it is." David handed me the box he was holding. "Actually, I prepared another gift for you." "What is it?" I looked at him puzzled. Then, as if performing a magic trick, he took out a jade bracelet. "Let me put it on for you." Before I could refuse, David had already grabbed my wrist and put the jade bracelet on. He looked at it in the light, a smile playing on his lips. "It's beautiful. You used to love these things." His gaze fell on me again. "Shouldn't you thank me?" I instantly understood what he meant. He wanted me to kiss his cheek. That's what he used to tell me to do before. "No, I can't." I refused. David frowned. "Why not?" "There's no reason. I just can't." I turned to leave, but suddenly remembered what David Turner had said yesterday. "Didn't you say you'd never see me again?" I asked him. The smile on David's face instantly froze. "Do you hope to never see me again?" "Whatever." With that, I turned and left, completely disregarding David Turner's gloomy face. I didn't take off the bracelet in front of David because I've been worrying about Frank's birthday recently. I once asked Frank what he wanted for his birthday. But Frank said he didn't want anything, that everything was fine as it was. That won't do, because last time on my birthday, Frank bought me a gift. The nanny who takes care of me says this is called reciprocity, and I shouldn't owe him. I wanted to buy some gifts for him, but I realized I had no money. I don't know the passwords to those bank cards either. I wanted to find my dad, but he refused to see me. I don't know why this is. I went to ask the nanny, but she cried and hugged me tightly. "Miss, you've suffered so much. You've contributed so much to the company, even if there's no merit, there's hard work. But they treat you like this just because you have no value anymore. This world is too realistic." I couldn't understand what the nanny was saying, so I just gently patted her back, wanting her not to be so sad. But after that day, I never saw the nanny again. The last thing she said to me before she left was, "Miss, if you really want to buy a gift for Mr. Frank, you can pawn things you don't like and use the money to buy him a gift." I looked down at the jade bracelet on my wrist. Thought it would be just right to pawn it. Said and done. While Frank hadn't noticed I was gone, I found the driver and asked him to take me to a place where I could sell things for money. The driver was slightly startled, but immediately understood my meaning. With a step on the gas, I arrived. I looked at the big characters reading pawn shop and walked straight in. "I want to sell this bracelet." How much money can I get?" I said to the staff. The staff member looked at the jade bracelet again and again. Do you have an appraisal certificate and receipt? I didn't understand what these were, so I shook my head. Then for this jade bracelet, I can only offer you a price of 30,000. 30,000 seemed like a lot. So I nodded repeatedly, okay, that's fine. Their inquiring gazes fell on me. Wait, I think there's a small flaw in your jade bracelet. I can't give you 30,000 anymore, how about 10,000? 10,000? I looked at him in bewilderment, not understanding why he suddenly said this. This price is already very high. If you don't believe me, you can ask elsewhere. I pouted, but finally agreed. All right, then give me the money now. The 10,000 was quickly transferred, and I turned to leave. Vaguely, I heard them discussing someone. Look at her, dressed so clean and proper, who would have thought she was a fool? Yeah, I tell you, even 10,000 is too much. I think 5,000 would be enough, after all, she can't count anyway. I took the 10,000 and first went to a bakery to buy a cake. Then I took the remaining money to the supermarket and bought a bunch of snacks. I had planned to give Frank a surprise. However, just as I reached the front door, Frank opened it. He looked at me anxiously and flustered. Where did you go? Why didn't you tell me? He spoke almost fearfully. I felt uneasy under his gaze and instinctively held his finger. Frank, happy birthday. What? He was slightly stunned, his hair messily scattered across his forehead. Tomorrow is your birthday, I went to buy you a cake. I pointed at the cake by my feet and the snacks in the bag behind me. Frank suddenly blinked hard and let out a light sigh. Cindy, thank you. You're welcome. The nanny says this is called reciprocity. Next time you go somewhere, tell me first, okay? No problem. I secretly vowed not to make Frank worry about me again. At midnight, we filled the cake with candles. The orange candlelight danced on Frank's cheeks as I urged him to make a wish. Frank gently closed his eyes, and the next second he blew out the candles. The lights suddenly brightened, and I looked at him curiously. What did you wish for? I carefully leaned closer to him, unable to control my gossipy heart. Can you tell me? I promise not to tell anyone else. I can tell you. Really? Frank nodded lightly, his black eyes reflecting my expectant figure. My wish is that I hope only I can call you Cindy. I was a bit surprised, just that? Yes, that's the wish. No problem, I promise you. I smiled at him and poured all the snacks I bought at Frank's feet. Why did you buy so many snacks? Frank asked in surprise. These aren't for me, they're for you. They're all snacks I like to eat. I wanted to give you the best. I didn't know what Frank needed, so I could only give him what I thought was the best. Frank stared at me in a daze. The expression on his face didn't seem happy, and suddenly he hugged me without warning. Warm liquid fell on my clothes. I didn't understand, why was he crying? So I patted Frank's back and daringly spoke up. Today is your birthday, it's a day worth celebrating, so can I skip the follow-up appointment tomorrow? No. Frank raised his head and spoke seriously. I pouted, okay. Every Monday was the day for my hospital follow-up. So Monday became the day I resisted the most. I dawdled slowly at home, while Frank sat on the sofa watching me. His patience was always greater than mine, and I felt guilty under his gaze. I coughed lightly, let's go. Okay. Frank drove me to the hospital. I nervously stood at the door of the examination room. Frank, can I hold your hand? I'm scared. I spoke softly. At times like this, Frank was always particularly soft-hearted. He reached out his well-defined hand to hold mine, leading me inside. The warmth from his palm spread through my pulse to my heart, and I inexplicably felt at ease. After the doctor asked me a few simple questions, he shook his head at Frank as usual. I particularly hated this expression, as if I had some incurable disease. But Frank never showed any expression. He led me out of the hospital, standing on the busy street. I stopped and looked at him. What's wrong? Why did you stop? He asked, puzzled. Frank, aren't you disappointed? Disappointed about what? At first, it was my father who accompanied me to the hospital for checkups. But every time he saw the doctor shake his head at him, he was very disappointed and his attitude towards me got worse and worse. What about you? Will you be disappointed and then your attitude towards me will get more and more? My choked voice prevented me from finishing a complete sentence. I knew I was different from others. But that doesn't mean I don't have the ability to perceive that I can't see other people's expressions. So I really don't want to go to the hospital. And Frank always seemed to understand what I was saying, to sense my pain. He half crouched in front of me, looking up into my eyes. Cindy, I won't be disappointed. I will never be disappointed in you, nor will I treat you worse and worse. Why? I asked, sobbing. Because I can't bear to. Frank spoke with such conviction that one couldn't help but believe him. Just as I was about to help Frank, who was half squatting in front of me, to stand up, my phone in my pocket started vibrating. It was a call from David Turner. I hung up without thinking, there was no time to answer the phone now. I wiped the tears from my face. Frank, get up quickly, I believe you. Okay. I knew Frank wouldn't let me hold his hand anymore, so I reached out and grabbed the hem of his clothes. Frank, I've been good and came to the hospital today, you should reward me. What do you want? Ice cream, I want to eat ice cream. Okay. I coughed lightly, pushing my luck, I want to eat too. No, your digestive system isn't good, you'll get a stomachache if you eat too much. Frank refused with good reason. I had to compromise. I still remember the time I secretly ate 3 ice creams and Frank didn't speak to me for half a day. I don't want Frank to ignore me again. After returning home, I realized that David Turner had sent me several messages. Cindy, who allowed you to hang up on me? Also, did you lose your jade bracelet? How did it end up in a pawn shop? I'm giving you 3 seconds to reply to my message. I instinctively glanced at my watch, it had been an hour since he sent me the message. The 3 seconds were long gone. I panicked for a moment, after all, one of the rules David had given me before was to reply to messages instantly. Failure to do so would result in punishment. But now I don't want to be friends with him anymore, so I don't need to obey. My gaze lingered on the name Cindy for a long time. I had promised Frank, and I must keep my word. I won't be like David who doesn't keep his promises. He once held me and said he would never leave me, but he left for 6 months. I hate people who don't keep their word. So I replied, from now on, you're not allowed to call me Cindy. I sold the jade bracelet. David replied quickly, say that again. I tilted my head in confusion, but eventually sent it again as he said, from now on, you're not allowed to call me Cindy. I sold the jade bracelet. Soon, David sent me a voice message. Do you know what you're saying? What, has your IQ regressed again? Apologize to me right now, and I'll forgive you. Apologize? I didn't do anything wrong, why should I apologize? So I replied, I absolutely won't apologize. After that, David didn't send me any more messages. However, the next day, my dad contacted me on his own initiative. My dad briefly told me to come back home in the evening. I agreed repeatedly. I thought my dad missed me. I jumped up excitedly and shared this news with Frank. Frank was as happy as I was. He even chose the clothes for me to wear when I go back. But when I put them on, I didn't feel pretty. I looked longingly at the pink outfit with the pretty sheep print on the bed before slowly walking out the door. I thought this would be a dinner just for me and my dad. But as soon as I walked in, I saw David Turner sitting on the sofa. Cindy, come here, my father said to me. I walked over cautiously, asking in confusion, Dad, why is he here? Don't be so impolite. I pouted. Mr. Brown, don't scare her. Maybe Cindy is still resentful about those 6 months I was abroad, David Turner said with a smile. Haha, what does she understand now? The company still needs young people like you, my dad laughed. He paused, his gaze falling on me. David said you sold the jade bracelet he gave you? I nervously tugged at the hem of my clothes, yes. How could you sell something someone gave you? Quickly apologized to David. My dad spoke to me sternly. I shrank my shoulders, saliva constantly secreting in my throat. Why should I apologize to him? Why doesn't anyone mention how he deceived me? Moreover, what he gave me became mine, I can do whatever I want with it. Just like when it was David's birthday, I gave him my favorite doll, and he threw it in the trash can. Did I say anything? Did I ask him to apologize to me? So I stubbornly said, I didn't do anything wrong, why should I apologize? I said apologize, so apologize. Don't say so much nonsense. My dad suddenly stood up, looking down at me. The look in his eyes was too complex, I couldn't understand it. And David beside him was watching this farce with great interest. Even if I die, I won't apologize. I slowly spoke, meeting my dad's gaze. The next second, my dad's palm landed on my cheek. I don't understand why my dad doesn't ask about the cause and effect and just unconditionally sides with David. I hate you all. I shouted this sentence and ran out without looking back. Tears blurred my vision ahead, I vaguely heard David calling my name behind me. But I didn't want to pay any attention to it at all. When I finally stopped walking, I realized I had arrived at the cemetery. I slowly walked along the path from my memory, eventually stopping in front of a tombstone. Looking at the blurred photo on the tombstone, I finally burst into tears. Mom. I miss you so much. Mom, why did you leave me so early? I miss you so much, do you know? Mom, can you come back and stay with me? I don't need much, just one day would be enough. I fell to my knees on the ground, my voice hoarse beyond recognition. My mother passed away from cancer when I was 6 years old, and since that day, I no longer had a mother. My dad was always away on business trips, often leaving me alone at home. I couldn't see my dad. And when I wanted to see my mom, I could only do so through dreams. But unfortunately, I had never dreamed of my mother. I thought, if my mother were still alive, she would never allow them to bully me like this. Just as I was about to faint from crying at the cemetery, David was the first to find me. He slowly walked towards me. All right, stop crying. I pretended not to hear what he said and continued sobbing. David raised his hand and rubbed his eyes, then let out a soft sigh. Okay, I don't need you to apologize anymore, let's go. As he spoke, David reached out to grab my arm. I immediately backed away to avoid him. David's eyes instantly darkened. What do you want? Haven't you had enough drama? I didn't say anything because I saw Frank running towards me from afar. Frank! I shouted at him. David instinctively turned to look. Frank ran to my side, panting heavily, and anxiously looked me up and down. Cindy, are you okay? I nodded and then shook my head. David frowned slightly, he really hated being ignored. So he spoke coldly, Cindy, come here, come with me. Frank's gaze finally fell on David, and then he stood in front of me. Cindy won't go with you. You can leave by yourself. Who do you think you are to make decisions for Cindy? David sneered. It doesn't matter who I am. What matters is that Cindy doesn't want to go with you. Cindy, tell me, who will you go with? David asked me insistently. I grabbed the hem of Frank's shirt and said firmly, I'm going with Frank. I want to go home with Frank. Frank took my hand and was about to lead me away from here. However, just as we were about to brush past David, he suddenly grabbed my wrist. David stared at me darkly. Who is he to you? Your new babysitter? Why are you listening to him so obediently? He's my friend. David let out a sigh of relief. Then why does he ask you to go home with him? Are you living together? I tilted my head in confusion. Didn't you say that friends are supposed to sleep together? Now I sleep with him every day. David looked at me in disbelief, his black pupils seeming to dilate. What are you saying? I'm saying, enough. David suddenly clutched his head, letting out a low growl, as if he was experiencing immense pain. I looked at him in confusion, and Frank quickly shielded me behind him. The next second, David suddenly lashed out, punching Frank in the face. Soon, the two of them were grappling with each other. Their clean clothes were stained with dirt, and they didn't forget to curse at each other. "You dare to deceive her too, you beast," David yelled at Frank. "I'm not as despicable as you. You're the one who's dirty and low." Frank kicked David hard, and David groaned in pain before lunging at him again. I had never seen such a scene before. It was like a horror movie. "Stop fighting, please stop." I went over, trying to pull them apart. However, as soon as I touched David's arm, he forcefully threw me aside. I stumbled and fell backward, my head hitting my mother's tombstone. Blood instantly stained a corner of the tombstone red. As I fell to the ground, I saw Frank's figure rushing towards me. I wanted to tell him not to cry, that I was fine. But before I could speak, I passed out. I felt like I had a dream. A dream that lasted for 3 years. So long that when I woke up, I still felt tired. My eyes met an unfamiliar environment, and my nose caught the unpleasant smell of disinfectant. Outside the door came the sound of an argument, seemingly between two men speaking in lowered voices. "You're not allowed in. Cindy won't want to see you. I find you to be so presumptuous." The next second, the door was pushed open forcefully. I saw David Turner. Memories came crashing down on me like an avalanche, and I stared at him blankly as he walked towards me. "Do you want some water?" David asked me. I didn't speak, and he approached me again. "Why aren't you saying anything?" His face kept getting closer in front of my eyes, and without thinking, I slapped him across the face. With a loud smack, I used all my strength. David looked at me in disbelief. But one slap wasn't enough to vent my anger, so I raised my hand to slap him a second time. However, David caught my hand midair. "Have you gone mad?" I looked at him with hatred, gritting my teeth as I called out his name, David Turner. These words left David stunned on the spot. His eyes went from confusion to shock, and he let go of my hand, stepping back. You've recovered." I threw off the covers and stepped onto the floor barefoot, my long black hair flowing in the breeze. "Why are you so scared? Did you do something you're guilty about?" "Don't worry, I won't let you off the hook," I muttered. The news of my recovery that day quickly became a trending topic. Information came pouring in like snowflakes. All sorts of greetings and fake sentiments. They all called themselves friends, but during the 3 years I was out of it, they only came to see me at the beginning. After that, whether it was David Turner's threats or something else, they all avoided me. In the end, only Frank remained by my side. I checked out of the hospital that same day. I had many things to do and no time to waste in the hospital. After Frank brought my luggage home, I headed to the company. As soon as I walked in, I attracted most of the gazes. Ms. Brown. They tentatively greeted me, their eyes full of undisguised curiosity. I nodded slightly in response. I entered the private elevator and went straight to the 27th floor. This was the CEO's office. Without hesitation, I knocked lightly twice on the door. "Come in," it was my father's voice. I pushed the door open and met my father's surprised gaze. How did you come here?" "It's been 3 years, I should come back," I said calmly. Father suddenly stood up from his chair, walked a few steps towards me, with tears seeming to glisten in his eyes. You've really recovered." Father let out a soft sigh. "Daughter, don't blame me, you should understand your father's difficulties." "All right, let's not talk about this. I want to return to the company, so please call a board meeting." I didn't want to discuss the relationship between family and interests. Often, it's best not to pierce through or see through things. All right, I'll arrange it as soon as possible. I'm glad you're back, sweetheart." Father reached out as if to pat my shoulder lightly, but ultimately chose to lower his hand. I didn't return home until midnight. As I pushed open the door, the living room was brightly lit. Frank sat on the sofa, staring at the TV without blinking. Only when he heard my voice did he turn his gaze towards me. "You're back, I'll go heat up some food for you." Frank hurriedly stood up and was about to walk into the kitchen. "No need, I've already had dinner," I paused and then added. "I've hired a new housekeeper, they'll be here in a couple of days." My words made Frank stop in his tracks. "Ah, that's fine then, as long as you've had dinner." Frank awkwardly licked his lips and sat back down on the sofa. Do you remember me? He asked with difficulty. I took off my coat and tossed it on the sofa. Yes. Really? Frank seemed somewhat excited. Of course, we went to the same high school. You were the study representative, named Frank. You actually remember me. I'm so happy. Frank's eyes sparkled as he looked at me. That's enough. What? I didn't hear him clearly. Nothing. Good night, Cin. Cindy Brown. I nodded slightly and slowly walked upstairs. I was clearly very tired. But when I lay down on the familiar big bed, I just couldn't fall asleep. My mind was filled with images of Frank. Before, my brain was always full of contracts and projects. Now it's suddenly filled with a person. How strange. I met Frank in high school. But I think the reason I noticed him was that he was late for the first class on the first day of school. Under the gaze of the teacher and all the classmates, he slowly sat down in front of me. And when class was over, he enthusiastically introduced himself to me. My name is Frank. What's yours? Cindy Brown. What a beautiful name. This was the first time someone had complimented my name. I kept a straight face, but I was actually delighted inside. From that day on, our interactions became more frequent. At that time, the company had just started, my dad was busy with business every day, and I didn't have a mother. As a result, I often went without breakfast for long periods. I don't know how Frank discovered this. So when I found a bread and an egg in my desk drawer, Frank just winked at me. He said, "My mom prepares them for me every day, but I've had enough. It would be a waste to throw them away, so why don't you try them?" I asked, "Then what will you eat?" Frank said, "I'm not hungry." I knew he was lying. How about this? We'll split it. Okay. So every morning, you would see Frank and me hiding on the school rooftop, eating bread and eggs together. This gradually evolved into us meeting at the library on Saturdays and Sundays during our rest days. At that time, I didn't understand what it meant to like someone. I just felt happy being with him. It wasn't until my sophomore year, when my father's company was doing better, and he took me to move to a big city, that I realized my feelings for him. But when I saved up money to return to the small town, Frank was no longer there. I asked my classmates, and they said he had moved away too. And so we lost touch with each other. I returned to the company and took over an important bidding project. One of the companies participating in the bid was David Turner's family company. Just to give David a good thrashing this time, I started pulling strings and networking, to the extent that I had been coming home drunk for several nights in a row. However, before I could start my revenge, David came first. He pushed the door open and walked in, still with that same deadpan expression. Although his tailored suit didn't have a single wrinkle, I could see his haggard appearance at a glance. His eyes were bloodshot, and his voice was extremely hoarse. "If you want that bidding project, I can withdraw." "Oh." I raised an eyebrow. "Then all your painstaking efforts on the proposal will go to waste." "That's not a small sum. Are you really that kind-hearted? Isn't this what you want to see?" David slowly approached me. "I've been thinking a lot these past few days. I don't want to say sorry, because it's meaningless." David paused. "What will it take for you to forgive me?" "Forgive?" I sneered as I said the word. I found it particularly laughable coming from David's mouth. I picked up the freshly brewed coffee from the desk and threw it at him. The scalding liquid splashed onto David's face. He didn't take a single step back. "Get out. Get out of here." I raised my hand, pointing towards the office door. "If you can kneel outside my company building for a day and a night, I might consider it." Although David said he would withdraw from the bidding, the prearranged drinking session couldn't be cancelled. So I came home drunk again. I staggered through the front door, only to see a suitcase placed at the entrance of the living room. I tilted my head and thought for a long time, but couldn't figure out where I was going on a business trip recently. It wasn't until Frank stood in front of me that I realized he was the one leaving. "Where are you going?" I asked with a slurred speech. At this moment, Frank was still considerate. He handed me a cup of sobering tea. "Drink this, you'll feel better after." I waved my hand in refusal. stubbornly asking, "Where are you going?" Frank let out a soft sigh. "You don't need me anymore, I should leave." I looked at Frank in confusion. When did I say I didn't need him? And why is he leaving again? The last time I went to the school to find him, he had already left. Now he wants to leave again. Where should I go to find him this time? So I said, "You're not allowed to leave. You don't need me anymore, there's no point in me staying here." "Who says there's no point? But look, you have a housekeeper to cook for you, a driver to drive for you, a gardener to trim your garden. I'm of no use." Frank said this even more sorrowfully than me. I slowly raised my gaze, landing on his full, rosy lips. "Who says he's of no use?" I walked towards him as if possessed. Frank was afraid I might fall, so he quickly held me steady. It was exactly what I wanted. I stood on my tiptoes and kissed his lips. "I need a husband, you can be that." In my dictionary, there has never been the word regret. So from the moment I opened my eyes on Frank's bed, I planned to marry Frank. Breakfast was made by Frank, delicious as always. I finished the last drop of milk and calmly said, "Frank, let's get married." My words almost choked Frank. He coughed violently twice. "You don't want to?" I asked unhappily. "No," Frank quickly waved his hand. "I feel like I'm dreaming." I quite liked hearing this. So I stood up and leaned over to kiss Frank's cheek. "It's real, this isn't a dream." Frank looked at me in astonishment, slowly covering my hand with his. "I really want to marry you, it's my dream come true, but I feel I'm not good enough for you." The sunlight fell dappled behind him, like an angel fallen to earth. I must hold on to him tightly. This is my hope. Then it's settled, we'll get our marriage license the day after tomorrow. Okay. Perhaps it's true that happy events lift one's spirits. Even people at the company noticed I was happy. They teased me, "Miss Brown, what's making you so happy? Share with us." I smiled, "I'm getting married." "Ah, congratulations, Miss Brown." I nodded, feeling genuine joy about marrying Frank. What I didn't expect was that David would get the news so quickly. I strongly suspect someone inside our company passed the information to him. David burst into my office again like a mad dog. "I heard you're getting married, don't tell me it's with Frank." I looked at him coldly. "It's none of your business. You should know, the reason you can still stand here today is because the rule of law saved you." "I know, but you can't marry him." David looked at me painfully. "You can't do this to me. If I say I've always liked you, would you give me a chance?" I felt like David was telling me a bad joke. "Your way of liking someone is through revenge, attacks, and humiliation?" No, it's just that I didn't understand what liking someone meant back then. And by the time I realized it, it was too late. I looked at him mockingly. "All right, stop joking around. Don't worry, I won't let you off the hook. Just don't let me catch you making any mistakes. Don't come to my company anymore, I feel sick just looking at you." I drove David out of the office. I thought David had left. But I didn't expect him to kneel down in front of the company building. When my secretary came up to tell me, she said security had tried to drive him away several times, but he still wouldn't leave. I signed the contract expressionlessly. If he wants to kneel, let him kneel. When I left the company at 6 in the evening, David was still kneeling there. He knelt upright, his gaze fixed straight ahead. The cool evening breeze blew at the corners of his clothes. The cold moonlight falling on him made him look lonely and helpless. It wasn't until I walked out that his gaze slightly moved. "Can you forgive me now?" I paused my steps forward, seeing Frank waiting for me from afar. "Never, not ever." I walked faster and faster, finally running straight into Frank's arms. "Why didn't you tell me you arrived? Have you been waiting long?" I asked with concern. "No, waiting for you never feels long." I laughed softly and looked up. Such sweet words. "I have even sweeter words, I'll tell you slowly in the future." "Okay." We held hands, fingers intertwined, and slowly walked towards the distance together. On the day we got our marriage license, we woke up early. I even put on elaborate makeup. I was about to marry the boy I loved in my youth. I nervously walked into the marriage registration office with Frank. When the staff asked if I was willing to marry voluntarily, I turned to look at Frank. Of course, I'm willing to marry Frank. Frank put his arm around my shoulders. I'm willing too. Then we took photos, signed, and pressed our fingerprints. After completing the whole process, Frank and I each received a red booklet as we walked out. I handed the marriage certificate to Frank, letting him carefully put it away. The phone in my pocket suddenly vibrated. It was a call from my secretary. Thinking it was about company matters, I answered the phone. Hello. Miss Brown, David Turner had a collision with a large truck on W Avenue and is currently undergoing emergency treatment. Should we buy some hot searches now to make their company's stock price drop? I was slightly stunned. W Avenue was only 500 meters away from the marriage registration office. Yes, go ahead. After saying this, I hung up the phone. I thought even God was helping me punish David Turner. Frank turned his head to ask me what happened. I smiled and shook my head, nothing. But I want to tell you something, Frank, I like you. In my youth, I didn't express my love, which left me with regret for so many years. Now I finally have the chance. Frank blinked his eyes, seeming about to cry. I like you too. We held hands tightly and got into the car together, driving together to our next happy destination. Side story 1. My name is Frank. When I received an invitation to my high school class reunion while abroad, I accepted without hesitation. The thought that had been suppressed in my heart began to sprout and take root uncontrollably. I thought there was a good chance Cindy Brown would attend the class reunion. I just wanted to catch a glimpse of her from afar. I admit that after all these years, I still miss her. I rushed back to the country overnight, waiting for the class reunion. However, when the day of the reunion arrived, my carefully planned outfit went to waste, and my excitement plummeted. The class monitor said Cindy Brown wouldn't come, not now, not ever. I asked him in shock, why? The class monitor patted my shoulder and whispered mysteriously in my ear. You just got back, so you don't know. Cindy Brown was in a car accident 3 years ago. Now she's become a fool, probably doesn't even know what 1 + 1 equals. I could understand each of the class monitor's sentences, but put together, I couldn't make sense of them. Cindy becoming a fool? It sounded like a bad joke. My first thought was disbelief, but when I saw the tacit agreement on my classmates' faces, I had no choice but to believe it. I thought, seeing is believing. But when I saw Cindy sitting outside crying, I knew they were telling the truth. The real Cindy Brown would never be like this, she was always strong and indifferent. I felt my heart tremble, and I carefully walked over to her. Why are you crying? I heard myself ask softly. Cindy looked up at me with tear-filled eyes. I'm waiting for David to come back. Who are you? At that moment, I didn't know who David Turner was. But I knew that someone who could make Cindy cry must not love her. So I slowly crouched down in front of her. You shouldn't wait for him anymore. He probably won't come back. Cindy cried even louder because of what I said. No, he said he would never leave me. After a while, Cindy suddenly stopped crying. She looked at me, puzzled. Why are you crying? Why are you crying? Were you abandoned by someone too? Instinctively, I raised my hand to wipe my face. I had really started crying. After that day, I moved into Cindy's home. I was responsible for taking care of Cindy's daily needs and meals. Every time I saw Cindy upset about David, I hated myself for not knowing earlier, for not coming back to the country sooner. Fortunately, under my care, Cindy thought about David Turner less and less frequently. She was even starting to forget about him. But what I never expected was that David Turner would come back. When David Turner's assistant wanted to take Cindy to the airport to meet him, I realized I had no right or reason to refuse. At the same time, I couldn't refuse. I couldn't make any decisions for Cindy. If I refused on Cindy's behalf, how would I be any different from David Turner? Controlling and kidnapping her in the name of love. So I asked Cindy, do you want to go? The assistant said David brought me a doll. I want to go. I nodded, trying hard to control my emotions. All right, but remember to come back early." Cindy nodded vigorously. My heart instantly melted. After Cindy left, I sat on the sofa. Every minute, every second felt like an eternity to me. Fortunately, Cindy came back before 10 p.m. But when she threw herself into my arms crying, my heart shattered. David Turner is a jerk, I thought to myself. However, what I didn't expect was that Cindy would celebrate my birthday. Especially when Cindy said all those snacks she bought were for me, I once again couldn't control my tears. She didn't know what I liked, but she was willing to give me what she liked. It moved me and made my heart ache. She was an angel who fell by my side when she was 18, and I've been falling for her ever since. But back then, I was insecure. I didn't dare confess to her. As a result, I missed my chance with her, and I blamed myself every restless night. Later, Cindy returned to normal. Her eyes were clear, her movements agile, no longer like before. She no longer depended on me like before, and everything was taken care of for her. I knew it was time for me to leave. She didn't need me anymore. So I mustered up all my courage to speak, but she refused. She said she wanted me to become her husband. She was willing to marry me. At that moment, enormous fireworks exploded in my mind. I was almost knocked out by happiness. Of course, I was more than willing. I wanted to marry her from the first moment I saw her at 18. And my love for her has never changed, from 18 until today. Extra Chapter 2. My name is David Turner. From the first time I saw Cindy Brown, I disliked her. As the sole heir of the Turner family, I was a young man with all the glory and excellence. Others couldn't wait to flatter me. But when I first met Cindy, she didn't even smile at me. I have to admit, I was very displeased. Especially after she took over as the company's CEO on behalf of her father, she snatched several projects from my hands. This deepened the conflict between us. It even got to the point where we exchanged harsh words at parties. I don't know why I could maintain a gentlemanly demeanor in front of others. But I always couldn't control my anger in front of her. I thought I must find a good opportunity to teach her a lesson. I don't know if heaven heard my thoughts, but this opportunity was delivered right to me. Cindy Brown was in a car accident and became a fool. When her relatives saw her like this, knowing she had no more value to them, they started to neglect her. She naturally fell into my hands. I thought I would constantly torment her, make her smile obediently at me. See if she still dares to ignore me, watching me go crazy like a madman. 3 years later, I thought Cindy had fallen in love with me. So I confidently went abroad for business. At first, Cindy called me frequently, and I enjoyed her dependence on me. I was smug inside. But gradually, her calls became less and less frequent. So I angrily told her not to contact me unless it was important. From that day on, she never called me again. I didn't want to admit that I panicked. So the project timeline was compressed to the shortest, and I came back in just half a year. But what greeted me was Cindy's coldness. I deluded myself into thinking that Cindy was just playing hard to get. Until this fantasy was shattered, Cindy admitted that she had fallen for someone else. I couldn't accept it and didn't want to accept it. During the time Cindy regained her memory, I couldn't sleep every night. Because I was missing her. I thought, if I confessed to Cindy that I loved her, would she give me a chance? So I tremblingly told her, but when I saw her eyes unmoved, I knew I had no chance. But later she actually said she was going to marry someone else. I really felt my heart was bleeding. I chose to kneel outside her company building, thinking if this could give me one chance, it would be good. However, when she came downstairs, she said she would never forgive me. I felt tears flowing down my face. I know, I was wrong, it was my fault. She really would never give me a chance. I should have given up. But on the day she went to get married, I couldn't control myself and drove out to chase her. However, just as I saw the car Cindy was driving, I ran a red light and collided with a large truck. At that moment, everything spun, and then I smelled the scent of blood. If only time could turn back. Then I would definitely go back to the moment I first saw her. I would smile and say to her, "Hello, I'm David Turner." Instead of lying in a pool of blood, remembering her face of hatred towards me. I know, this is what I deserve.